Well, I hope you had a good week and a good weekend. Hope everybody did. When is spring break? Is that this week or next week?
It is
Because I
the
thought it was like
10th.
Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. What's that?
It's the 10th through the 15th
Oh,
of
so it's already
March.
gone?
No, not yet. Sorry, March.
Of March. Okay. Yeah, I'm just a little bit out of it.
I did find something really cool I was going to send you. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a short film called Origami. Have
No, I haven't.
have you heard it? You haven't? Oh, it's really good. I'll send it to you.
Okay, that'd be great. If it doesn't have anything salacious in it, we'll send a link to everybody. Well, it's good to see Rihanna and Aaron here as well. Thank you guys for showing up. I wanted to, I've mentioned this several times before, and I thought I had taken care of it, but evidently I haven't. Um, I had plugged in to change the due dates. Every time you have a class that's all done and you put it into Canvas and put it into a new semester, you can change the due dates and everything, and it will do it automatically. And for whatever reason, even though I'd done that and it looked like it was right, they reset themselves. And I don't really understand. Um, I don't want anybody to freak out about all the things that are due and everything. I've tried to go through and take care of that. Please let me know if it looks like things are stacked up too tight. Tell me and I'll change it. And again, I've mentioned before that everything is finally due at the end of the term. The due dates are there primarily to help you remember just to stay on top of stuff. So I just wanted to remind everybody of that. And what I'd like to do tonight, if it's okay with you guys, is I want to go through the quizzes and I want to look at what people have sent in for the structure with the skin. And then I want to talk about the biomorphic carving. Now, who was here last week when we talked about biomorphic abstraction and just what abstraction is? Okay, good. So I know, Brittany, you were there. Rihanna, were you there?
I believe so.
Okay. Is one of the things we talked about is that abstraction is a synonym for simplifying most of the time. And the two types of abstraction we talked about were non-objective and biomorphic. And non-objective is when you don't start with something you can hold in your hand or look or see in the real world, like numbers, lettering, symbols, things like that are non-objective, or emotions, for example. And then biomorphic abstraction is more like Paul Klee or Picasso or Robert Moore, these guys who will start with something and simplify portions of it and put it together in new ways. And that's the kind of abstraction that we're looking at for the carving, and the kind of abstraction for the that we're moving towards with the structure and skin is more non-objective, because I've asked you guys just to make a module that you repeat. And I'm wondering, I would, before we do anything else, I kind of like to go through and look at everything that's been turned in so far with the structure and skin. Is that okay with you guys? And I'll do this. I haven't finished grading those yet because I want everybody to look at them. Last week there were only a couple that were turned in, but I want to look at those and we'll talk about each of them. And so um, if you see your grade and you don't get all the points you think or that you want, you'll know. We'll talk about why, so that you can go through and fix it. So let's see. Does that sound good with you guys? Okay. All right, here we're looking at one. Let's see, I'm trying to get this as big as I can so you guys can look at it or see the whole thing. I think this is a really interesting approach to the problem. What we're trying to do, again, for the structure with skin, is to determine a module and then make at least 6 of these modules and put them together and apply skin to them so that you're dealing with skin that both hides and reveals the structure with the idea that they're about the same weight. They're the same importance to the structure. What I like about this is that it's really obvious to me. The the module on this, it looks like it's a tetrahedron. And it looks to me like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It looks like there's about 10 of them. And then there's 6 of these pieces of paper. Now, ordinarily, I don't really care for this kind of thing with the paper just put in there because it almost looks, usually it will look like an afterthought. But the individual did this. Remember, I said that the paper or the skin needs to be something that both hides and showcases the structure. So it needs to be in front of some sticks and behind some sticks, essentially. And what I like about what this person has done is you look at these 6 different pieces of paper, and each of them are attached to the tetrahedron in a different way. They're all organic, they aren't glued onto the flat surface. But like we get these two, which are almost on edge. So we see most of the sticks. This one is hiding a lot. This one is both behind and in front of some sticks. This is in front of quite a few, and this is both behind and in front. So even though that's something that I don't generally look forward to seeing in something like this, I am impressed. This person who built this was really paying attention to that idea of making both the structure and the skin equally important. Do you guys see what I'm talking about when we look at this? Okay. So I hope that makes sense to people. Is that the module is clear and easy to define. Several of them were put together. I also like how this person photographed it. I think this is a good photograph. I like seeing all the shadows of sticks in the background, but you can also see shadows of skin. That is nicely done. Now this one, I think this one is really an interesting one. And I think it does a pretty decent job with some elements of the structure. But the big thing that I see missing on this is there's no skin element. And remember, we needed to have the skin on there. And you could do the skin with weaving. Paper is the simplest thing. But this person really should look at this, and the module themselves aren't three-dimensional modules. They're flat. I think that this is a really interesting shape, but that kind of I find doesn't fit with the module either, or the assignment description either, because it looks like the module is basically 5 sticks that are flat, and then they're not really stuck together. They're stuck to a common base. And maybe this could work. Maybe it could, but I don't see a three-dimensional structure to the module, and I don't see the skin anywhere. And maybe that's on another photo. Let's see if there are other
Yeah,
photos.
it
We do
is.
have we do have some skin there. Okay, that's a little bit better. Okay, I think that works a little bit better. I think that the thing that seems to me to run counter to the assignment is that the module themselves are flat. And I'm wondering if the simplest way to fix that is to put some sticks to attach them dimensionally, like every pair of them or something. I don't know. Or maybe another photo. Let's see, because maybe another photo looking at it from this side right here, so we see the whole length of it. Because right now we're seeing it primarily from one end. So that's something that's something that will be really kind of an interesting thing to do, and maybe that might be solved by just attaching sticks right between these angles on all of them and doing that all the way down, like right down there and maybe right there. I don't know. I think that this is a really cool form, though. I love that form. I think this is one of the ones that we looked at last week. And I think I talked about it a little bit, that this would not be successful if it was just a tower. I like the fact that there was part that went out this way and part that went out that way. I see that's an interest, and I like how the photos kind of showed off those sticks. I think this is an interesting way, of it looks like the sticks are almost wrapped with paper themselves, which is kind of interesting in addition to the tag board there. This one I think is really fascinating. I don't know, this doesn't seem to fit the element of the assignment where you're supposed to have a repeated module. I think it's really interesting, but I don't see what the repeated module is. Maybe it's this umbrella form. If that's the case, then maybe this should be more obvious of an umbrella form. I think I like this. I think is an interesting approach to the adding the paper. An issue I have is that I'd almost rather see like every other thing missing, so we can get that where we talked about the skin being in front of sticks and behind the sticks as well. And I don't really see that as well as this. I think this is really an interesting approach to applying the skin. And I think that this one is really interesting. So I have some problems with this just because well, it is really interesting. I think it's fascinating the way it's done, but I don't really understand where the modules come in, because it doesn't look like this person made 6 of the same module like that's in the assignment. This is interesting as well. I think this shares something in common with that other one that we looked at several ago, where it was diamonds with sticks sticking off of one of the corners, all in a row. This I think is interesting. The module, again, it's not really a module; it's just flat. But I think that this is kind of fascinating for one thing, because it does really try hard to address that concept of space. And one of the examples uh, that we looked at the very beginning of the assignment is shows, let's see if I can find that. Okay, I'm going to see if I can find that picture really quick. So give me just a second here. Okay. So right here on this one, can you guys all see this image on the far right? Can you guys see that? Okay. This image on the far right, the module is not really a three-dimensional module. This is a 3D module, this is a 3D module. But I think that this works because that person is playing with the idea of these forms in space. And I think if we go back to this structure, I think that kind of accommodates that a little bit. I mean, it feels like it's on the same kind of wavelength as that other one. The one thing I don't really, I don't feel is as successful as as the student example that we saw in the assignment page, is this vertical line right through here that acts as an anchor. And I don't know if there's anything that can be done about that. I think that this is kind of interesting because there is a lot of skin to it. I think that's really fascinating, and the skin is on different planes. It would be really fascinating to me to see. Let's see if we. I wonder if this is the only photo of it. I'm wondering if, like, a couple other views and more paper on that would help to solve that. But I do think it resolves some of the issues with reaching into space. I think it does do that, but this vertical line, I don't know, maybe it's not a problem. I don't know. That's one of the things when we're looking at the class that there are specific things to do for the assignment, and then I also tell you what the assignment is about, and sometimes it's kind of hard, even when people are breaking the rules, so to speak. I'm using big foam figure air quotes. Sometimes it's successful, and sometimes maybe not quite as much, because sometimes when you break the rules, you're still able to accomplish the assignment. This one, I don't really have a problem with this one, because I look at this, we have a clearly defined module. It's this milk crate shaped thing, and the person on each of these modules have put one or two pieces of paper over the edges. And what's good for me is that they're done in several different directions. So here we have paper in front of the module. Here we have it that we can see on the edges. This is right on, like on the razor's edge, but this is behind. This is behind. This is in front. And I think that this person is doing a pretty decent job of activating the volume of space around it. So this, I find that this is looking not too bad. I think this one is really fascinating, but again, I don't really see a clearly defined module like that is required in the assignment. And it's difficult for me to judge this in comparison to the assignment parameters, because one of the portions of the assignment is to make a module that is repeatable and repeated. And I don't see that anywhere. I'm wondering if there are some pieces of paper in this and stuff, but I'm wondering if, like, a piece of paper right here, maybe couple pieces of paper on this area right here, piece of paper behind, maybe. Maybe that would help bring it up a bit, in more in line with the assignment. I think it is really interesting looking, though. Now I am going through, this is a good example of, I've mentioned several times in the syllabus and on our meetings that my system does not read HEIC. Usually that's a file that's sent directly from smarter cell phones. It needs to be like a PDF or a JPEG for my system to read it, or PNG files work as well. So I'll be able to grade this as soon as I get a different file sent, but the system will not recognize HEIC files. Okay, this is another one that we looked at last week. Hopefully you remember some of the things we talked about last week. I think the module here is really interesting because it's almost like a tetrahedron, except instead of having the 6 edges, it only has 5, because like the edge that would come from here to the point and from here to the point are replaced by something going to the middle. And we mentioned last week about how the person did different shapes for the skin that we thought were that I thought was kind of interesting. This one, I'm thinking I'm running into kind of a similar issue with the module where the thing is flat. But on this case, I like with that other one we looked at where all the shapes were flat, it doesn't bother me as much because the person attached all these triangles at very different angles and made this three-dimensional piece that really kind of blossomed out like a tree, as opposed to just being a tower or a line. So I think that this is a little bit more successful. And I think it's where they put the skin is really interesting too. But I would like to see maybe a little bit more skin, or maybe some more of these triangles to kind of stick out in different places. But I think that this is really an interesting approach. And I'm going over these really quick. This is what I would do in class as you guys were working on these, but since we only meet once a week, that's kind of difficult. Now this is very similar to that one that we just saw with all the triangles. It seems to me that this person is doing the same kind of thing, branching it out into space. And I think that is really fascinating. And I think this idea of making the skin with that additional line quality is really fascinating. And this kind of thing where we have a skin hiding the stuff behind it, but we can really tell that something is going on. That kind of thing is irritating to me, but is not a bad thing at all. That ties right in. Do you remember one of the 7 elements of uh, actually no, the 9 different elements they use to get people involved in your imagery is to make it so that people feel a little bit unbalanced and they want to go around it. I don't remember what that one is called, but this lack of formal balance kind of makes you want to get over here and look at it from this side. And then when you look at it from that side, this piece is hiding what's behind it. So you want to get over here to look behind it. And then you have another piece right here that's hiding. So I think this person did a really good job spacing those skin triangles. This is really interesting. I think that this is a fascinating one. And again, this I think there's been a couple so far where I couldn't really identify a module. And this is one of those where there's some fascinating shapes. And I think what they did was really interesting, but this does not have a really defined module that's repeated. And I think the skin, I think, is the weaving and stuff. I think really interesting way of addressing that. Okay, let's see. But again, I'm having a hard time finding a module that's repeated. And I think that this person, this individual, the photography is really kind of interesting. I'm a little bit confused by the background, and I think that this person it might be better to have like a carpet, or not a carpet, excuse me, a sheet behind it with that infinity kind of loop that we talked about, where you weigh down the base of it, and you let the sheet kind of belly out in a curve, and you hang the top of it up a little bit. I have that really short video that I showed everybody when I was taking pictures of that my green vase sculpture. I think that this is really interesting, but I don't see the same module repeated. Right. I went through those really quick and everything, but do you guys kind of see kind of get what I'm going for? I don't think any of them are bad. None of them are bad. But what we're looking at is how close they come to following the parameters of the assignment. And the parameters are flexible. But there are some things to pay attention to. Like if the module is going to be a flat shape, try to disperse that module out and repeat it out in different ways to fill out a volume of space, activate the space around it. Um, it calls for modules, so it calls for repeated modules, and they can be changed a bit, but they need to be identifiable and relatable to each other. It needs to be something that you can tell has been repeated. Creating a shape and then creating several more shapes that are completely different are not really making the modules. So, and that's one of the problems that I have with having to grade stuff like this. The grade is not how well you do, because all of you do a really good job. It's how well the assignment parameters are followed, and that can be really irritating for me, because I will like a lot of stuff that I think is awesome, but it doesn't follow the assignment. Let's see. I am going to Hold on a sec. Okay, there we go. Does anybody have any questions about the stuff that we looked at? Okay. Has anybody's feelings been hurt by any of the things that I said? Okay, is anybody gonna now? Long, you wrote me. You told me that you were really sensitive, and I did not want to hurt your feelings at all. So, are you gonna be okay? All right. I'm kidding.
I'll be fine. I'll be okay.
I was kidding. I didn't write letters to anybody. If I did, I wouldn't care if they answered. So.
The HEIC one, that one was mine. I accidentally uploaded, but I switched it over to JPEG and re-uploaded again just now. So.
Oh, okay. All right. Let me see if I can find it then. Let's see. Okay, I'm looking. Let's see if I can find it. Let's see. Okay. Sorry about that. I am still trying to find this. Hold on just a second here. Okay. All right. Okay, yeah, that worked. Let me pull this up for everybody to see. All right, I think that this is really an interesting one as well. And one thing that I really like about this is I love it when you guys are creative with what you do with the skin. The modules seem to be a little bit flatter than, it doesn't, the modules don't, if the module is this kind of hexagon type shape, I think that could be really, really interesting. But I would like to see more of these stuck out at different angles so it activates the volume of space around it. And the way the skin is applied, I really love this treatment, but that's one of the reasons why I'd like to see different planes when the modules are attached to each other, because then we could see not just the burnt paper towel in front of stuff, but also behind it and on the side. So I would recommend this. Would be interesting to have some more of these kinds of shapes at different angles sticking off, and the skin attached at different angles to it as well. I think, but this is really a fascinating texture. It looks to me like, I was going to say burnt toilet paper, but I'm hoping it's burnt paper towel. So. Let's see. Okay. Now, we did talk about quizzes a little bit. I want to go over this quiz. Okay. All right. So I think we've already touched on this quiz a little bit, but before we go on, does everybody understand what I'm talking about in relation to the structure with skin? Okay. And I'm pretty sure that we talked about this quiz before, where we talk about the delineated forms are forms that are essentially outlined by either a change of texture, change of angle, how the light hits it, but by lines that essentially our brain creates that aren't lines in the real world. And in this case, delineated forms would be these rings right here, the circles that these rings make, and these rungs on the ladder. They aren't lines, but they act as lines. And so the fact that they're there and there's a sudden change from something that's physical to space where nothing is there, the negative space, these become, or that these areas of negative space that are shaped like circles on either side and like rectangles right here become the delineated forms. And that's something that is talked about in your book. And we've talked about negative spaces as well. This is a really good example of that. Without negative space, we wouldn't see these structures right through here that make the sculpture interesting. If this didn't have any negative space, it would look like a giant ball of putty or a big potato. And unless you're into potatoes, it's just not that interesting. And so those are good things to be mindful of. But what I did want to do is go over this really quick. Let's see. Okay, this isn't even due until March 2nd. So we don't really have to go. We'll just talk about it briefly as you get ready to do it. This is for a few, as we start being aware of texture and things like that. One of the things that I ask you to do is look at the text. It gives example of different textures. And right here, I list 6, but I ask you to list 12. And the 12 different textures, these are things to be mindful of. When we're working in 3 dimensions, texture becomes really important. Texture is important. Most of you guys are 2D artists, right? Who's a 2D artist? Yeah, almost all of you. When you do texture, it's going to be primarily visual texture because you want people to assume there's a texture because of what they're looking at. When we're doing 3-dimensional stuff, a lot of that visual texture is achieved because we make functional physical textures as well. Visual texture is a texture that's encountered primarily through the eyes. And when we start looking at different words for texture, it can be really hard to come up with 12 of them. But what's fascinating to me is if you do this with roommates or family members or a buddy or whatever, and you start brainstorming, usually the first 4 or 5 are very difficult, but then you start getting more and more. And I wanted to demonstrate that really quick here. If you guys don't mind, each of you just say a text, 2 or 3 textures, and I will start with one, and we can go around and we can do it alphabetically. And you can think of ones from the beginning of the alphabet. But what's interesting is that it's going to be very hard thinking of the first one, and then after we get to the second one, it'll be easier and easier. And so I want to go. Everybody do one, then everybody will do a second one, then everybody will do a third one. Okay, so my first one is snotty. Who wants to go next? All right, Brittany.
Sticky.
Sticky. Excellent. Who's next? Okay, long.
I'll say crunchy.
Crunchy. Excellent. Okay, who's next? Rihanna.
Spongy.
Spongy is perfect. Okay, how about you, Aaron?
We do fuzzy.
Fuzzy. Terrific. Okay, another one for me is sandy.
Delicate.
Delicate. Okay. Who's next?
Sharp.
Sharp. Great. Who's next?
I'm trying to think of a word for the texture of when, like, there's fabric that has a raised pattern on it.
Like corduroy?
Kind of more like embroidery or lace.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. Lacy?
Lacy.
Okay. Excellent. Great. All right. How about you, Aaron?
Have we done prickly?
No, nobody's done prickly.
Like prickly?
Excellent. All right. The next one for me is going to be bumpy.
Pocked.
Pocked? Okay. Excellent.
Jagged.
Jagged. Great.
I'm once again envisioning a texture, but I can't think of the word. I guess just smooth.
Smooth?
Glassy.
Okay.
Glassy.
Glassy. Okay, great. Excellent. Okay, Aaron.
Scaly?
Scaly. Beautiful. Okay, and we could keep going around like this several times, but see, it starts getting easier and easier, doesn't it? So when you get to that quiz, if you are having a hard time coming up with names of textures, talk to somebody and just start saying them out loud to the room if you're the only one there. And after about 4 or 5, they'll become easier and easier and easier. We were getting ones in doing this in class. We were getting ones fermented. I don't know what kind of texture that would be. Slimy, rotten, stringy. So just really disgusting ones. Snotty, of course, we mentioned, but there's also there's the corduroy, fabricy, furry, uh, soft, fluffy, like lamb's wool, deer hide, uh, um, crocodile skin, alligator skin, elephant skin. We were getting all rough. I think Long said crunchy, and it starts coming faster and faster and faster. And all you got to do is list 12 that aren't already listed there in the quiz. Now that does come in handy. The thing that I promised we would talk about today is the next assignment, which is your carving. And for this, I think it is important to be aware of the textures, and I'll explain why. Um, let me share. Okay, let me share my screen with you here. Okay, this doesn't have a lot of photos on it. I did do a demo for the foam carving, which is absolutely fantastic. But when we're talking about the biomorphic abstraction, what we're doing is taking the foam, we're carving it so it looks organic, it looks abstracted, it looks unusual. We're simplifying shapes we're familiar with. We're putting things together that we kind of want to see together. And but it is not supposed to be anything specific. The reason why we're talking about this with texture about this time to get your brain going is that your final project is going to be where you're going to be taking, after you carve this, you're going to be covering it with paper mache. You're going to be sanding it so it's smooth, and then you're going to be painting it and applying texture to it. And that's the last physical thing that we're going to do in the class, applying texture and color to something. So it's important to think about that now as you get forward to working on it, because that kind of does help you create the foundation as you're carving it, to be thinking about that. It does help as you're creating the foundation now for the thing that you'll be making at the end of the term. And this lion man sculpture, these are really kind of interesting videos where it talks about how it was carved. One of the things I have did do a demonstration on how to carve with the foam, but I think there's this demonstration is with wood. Again, you're working with foam, you're not working with wood. And I wonder, this I think might be like an hour long. So we're not going to watch the whole yeah, it's an hour and 20 minutes long. But here, the first bit is I'm showing how to carve and just showing what the process is. So definitely watch this. I look very angry. I'm not really angry. I just scowl when I'm trying to concentrate. And I show how to use different tools like the knives as well as sanding it. I don't know why it's not showing other images from it. I'm showing how to carve it from several different sides. But what I want you to do when you're done carving this is have an object that looks very organic and does not look like the block. And I'm kind of scrolling it forward so you can kind of see. All right. Are you guys able to see any of this as I'm scrolling along the bottom. Are you able to see? Okay. And I cut a hole out of it right there and show that a little bit. You can cut holes in it. And then one of the other things that I'm doing too is I'm trying to carve it on different planes. I wonder if I can show some of that. Oh, there we go. Okay, so on this I have like one ring that my one hand is holding, and then right angles to that in the same form, I have another flat piece that sticks out that you can kind of see. So I don't want you to, this needs to be something that is involved in three-dimensional space. So if you look at it from one side, you're not going to be able to see the whole thing. You need to be able to turn it around and make it interesting from all sorts of different angles. And then I also give the last little bit as I show you how to do the paper mache, which is the next module after this is touching on the paper mache. Because what you'll need to do after carving this is cover it with paper mache. And we'll talk more about that next week as well. But as you look at these different artists in the background of the carved biomorphic abstraction, there are several different artists that we look at, and they just do some really interesting things. And I do want to share this video with you. This is both an excellent video showing sculpture that is really, really cool, but it also, do you guys remember we talked about the 4 tools of artistic critique? You guys remember that? One of your assignments towards the end of the term is to do videos where you do an artistic critique of one of your own works and of somebody else's work. So 2 different short videos. The 4 tools of artistic critique are describe, analyze, where you talk about how it was made, interpret, where you describe why, and then evaluate whether or not it's successful. And if it's okay with you, well, I'm going to do it anyway, whether or not it's okay with you. We're going to watch this. And this is, it's one of Henry Moore's reclining figure sculptures. And this is also, while we're looking at it, to kind of give you an idea of the kinds of forms we want to work with, the kind of texture we want to see, you're also going to be listening to Dr. Harris and Dr. Zucker on their application of the 4 tools of artistic critique. And they aren't going to list the tools before they talk about them. But after we're done watching this, it's only about 6.5 minutes long. I want to get into a discussion a little bit about what they had to say. All right, if that's all right with everybody. Well, whether or not it's all right with you, we're going to do it. So, okay, here we go. Just a word. I really like the piano intro, so I appreciate everybody being quiet during that.
Describing something can seem very straightforward, but in fact, describing a work of art can take time and should take time, because the more you describe something, the more you understand what you see and the closer you'll get to interpreting what you see. So this is why describing is one of those first skills that art historians learn.
And really, anybody who goes to the museum should have conversations about what they see and the associations that it brings to mind, in addition to pure description.
So here's what we're not.
As they're showing different close-up shots of this, can you see the biomorphic abstraction type shapes? Do you see how they're related to the physical world? There's curves, there's smooth areas, but none of these things are direct one-to-one correspondence with anything that's actually real. It isn't a direct representation. They're simplified forms. And they're going to talk about that a little bit, but I wanted you to see that, recognize that at the beginning.
We're not going to do. We're not going to talk about when the sculpture was made. We're not going to talk about the historical context. We're not going to talk about the artist's biography. We're only going to describe what we see.
I see a human body, and it's large. one that's abstracted, that's not a careful rendering of human anatomy.
I see what look like arms and legs and a reclining figure.
There's no question that we immediately recognize the legs, the knees, the torso, the elbows, the neck. But the more that we look at those individual parts of the body, the more that we see the choices that the artist has made, the more we recognize that this is not an actual elbow. That's not really a neck. That's not really a head, but we still see it that way.
And most obviously, what makes this not really a body is the giant cavity, that giant open space where we expect to see a torso.
But before we begin to describe the individual elements of the sculpture, I think it's also important to make a few observations about the material and the surface. The sculpture is a dirty white, and it's so smooth that it invites us to touch it, even though the museum would rather we didn't.
Well, it does have these lovely curvilinear forms that feel like they would be very pleasurable to touch. But there's also a way in which that dirty ivory color feels like bone, feels organic.
And that's complicated because bones are on the inside, but what we're seeing is the outside. Or is this a fossil? Has the flesh been removed? Except that the figure seems animated. It seems as if it's still intact.
As we look closer, we see forms that seem to be missing. Hands, or at least fingers, feet, and parts of the body also seem to be duplicated. What read to me as breasts occur in two places in the sculpture. What read to me as hips occurs in two places in the sculpture.
So we can't be too literal at any point. You said a moment ago that there are no fingers, but there's a reference to fingers. That is, the fingers have been abstracted. If you look at the figure's left hand, it seems to be a fist with its fingers curled in, described by an oval of string that's embedded in the surface.
Nevertheless, the artist has decided not to give us individual fingers. He's decided not to give us an ankle and a foot with toes and an arch in it.
But that is still a foot. Because of the angle at which the leg ends, I get the sense of a heel, of toes, and I get the sense of where the ankle would be. It's as if the artist is inviting me to fill in what he's left out.
In a way, the negative space, the space between the forms, feels just as substantial as the forms themselves. That space where the torso should be, which is empty. The way that what reads as the spine or the upper back is uplifted as the form seems to support itself on its elbows. That lovely negative space that gives us a sense of lifting up of the upper body.
And because of that lifting up, not only on the elbows and the forearms, but also on these other indeterminate limbs, I get the sense that this is not only human. It's a different kind of creature, almost an insect that could move forward on all fours or perhaps all sixes.
There's also a tension between the soft, organic, rounded forms and these straight lines that seem to draw our attention to a breast, an elbow, a shoulder.
A contour. This is drawing on form. Granted, when I look at this sculpture, I can't help but think of the human body, but I also have a sense that I'm looking at a landscape, that the knees are distant mountains, that somehow this is a unity of human form and the earth itself.
It's so funny that you say that, because when I see this sculpture, I immediately imagine a figure on a beach. So I didn't just imagine a reclining figure. I imagined the natural location of this figure outside,
Sunbaked.
in fact, lifting up to catch the rays of the sun.
The almost cushion-like form in the center of the sculpture that can be read simultaneously as a chest, as breasts, perhaps as a torso, as an indeterminate form, creates for me a feeling. It is the feeling that I have when I arch my back. When I look at this sculpture, I feel that pulling in my body. And so the artist has used the simplest of tools. He's used form itself. He's used the line that he's constructed with string. And he's able to create in me an association and a physical memory.
Some views of the sculpture feel very recumbent and languorous, where others have a sense of tension. If we look at what reads as the head, we see two circular forms with an indentation in the center that read as an eye, and that open mouth that seems to be yearning and even almost crying.
So we've spent only a few minutes looking at this sculpture, but we've developed a whole set of associations. We've matched words with what we're seeing, and those words have created a foundation for our own personal interpretation. And I find that if I spend time describing, if I spend time looking closely, even a work of art that at first seemed difficult and confusing, that perhaps I didn't like at first glance, this changes, and an appreciation for what the artist achieved begins to develop.
So what did you guys think about that? And what I'm asking is both the physical structure that we looked at as well as their commentary about it. Rihanna, what did you think?
I actually watched this video. I got confused and watched it like 2 weeks ago, and it may have rewired my brain a little bit. Just the way they were talking and interpreting it and the abstractness of the thing itself. I was watching it like, you know.
Well, and I love that. I can really see them going through each of those steps that we talked about with the 4 tools of artistic critique. But I think it also really helps to be aware of the kind of form structure that we're talking about. And, what abstraction really means in the application when you're sculpting something. And I like that it made your brain explode. Um, there are forms in there, like where it shows the left fist and the feet. They don't really look like hands and feet, do they? Not really. But with those lines in there and the implication of what they might be because of the associations in the simplified forms of what they could be, then your brain starts interpreting them as different things like that. And instead of just an identifiable foot, like what Camille Claudel carved out of marble, um, you're getting something that could be, on one hand, a foot, it could be a hoof, it could be the idea of a foot, it could be an insect foot, it could be a probe of some sort, it could be a support, an organic support of some sort, or a broken off end of a bone. And that's the kind of thing that is fascinating to me, because when you are working on this project, I don't want you to narrow it down to something that is specifically focused so much as do something that other people can participate in developing meaning for. I'm sorry, Rihanna, what were you going to say?
I was just, when you were listing things it could be, I was just gonna say, or 2 peg legs.
Yeah. I like what a friend of mine watched the Pirates of the Caribbean, the first movie, and he said he was just waiting for one of the pirates to come out with 2 eye patches. But yeah, yeah, it could be 2 peg legs. But I like looking at this kind of stuff, and I want you to look through each of those videos and the background information to kind of show what other people have done. And the Henry Moore sculpture, I think, is really ideal for this sculpture project, because it shows organic forms that are related to things like teeth and plant life, um, vine kind of growths, or bones, hip joints, different things like that are intended to be organic, but not intended to be any organic thing specifically. Like this project gets really frustrating when you try to make a perfect carving of your dog's head, or you're trying to make a specific thing. That's not important. That's not what we're trying to do. If you are fascinated by teeth, then include a crown or partial root or some of the textures that you see on the sides of a tooth, and maybe blend that with a knuckle bone that you see, a chicken leg that you see, or some of the bumpy texture of chicken skin, and incorporate that in your carving. There's lots of different kinds of things that you can do. But for this carving, and I do talk about it, what you'll need to do is sand it and get it as smooth as you can with the sanding. You're not going to get it perfectly smooth because this foam it will beat up and come off when you try sanding it, but you want to get it as smooth as you can. And then we're going to go into a slightly different tangent for a week and then come back and have you do the plaster Paris on this. And we'll talk more about that. But if you watch that entire riveting hour and 20-minute demonstration that I have, it goes through all the carving and everything like that. So, and it is absolutely riveting. It's not, it's really, really super boring, but I'm pretending it's riveting because I want to inspire you to look at it anyway. Okay. I'm going to share my screen again. Yeah, and these different sculptures, this is Henry Moore as well. And this also shows several different Henry Moore sculptures. And you can kind of see them and these where you can see those kind of abstracted organic forms. Where they don't look like a one-to-one correspondence to anything in the real world. And this shows some stuff by a Japanese artist that is really amazing. Brancusi, I love some of the stuff there, and I want to show this to you really quickly. This is Constantine Brancusi, and it's called Fish. But as we look at it, I want you to be able to talk a little bit about the relationship of this object to an actual fish, what a fish actually looks like. So looking at that, walking around it really quickly, how much of it was actually a fish? What element of it makes you think of a fish?
I think for me it was the shape from like it taper off at the end and have a wider head, and yeah, it almost looked like an arowana. If you guys know what that is.
Well, did it look like an actual fish though?
No.
No. What were you? I like that observation, Long. Very good. How about you, Rihanna?
I actually have a fish. It's like he's a beta, so he has really big fins that flare out like that. And there's
Right.
kind of a nose on one end and then like that, but also from the side it's very wide, but from the front it's very narrow, which that's fish-ish. Also, it's very just smooth and streamlined.
Yeah, and I like that. I like these kinds of observations because what you're talking about is this artist has been able to encapsulate some of the ideas about fishness. You know, what makes a fish, but he stayed as far as he could away from showing any sort of actual specific fish. You know, you have that wide from one side, narrow from another angle, or the overall form, like Long was talking about, where it's wide towards the tail and narrow towards the nose, kind of thing. And I love that, where he's expressing the elements that we associate with something being a fish without being very specific about the fish actually being a fish. And that's the kind of thing we want to look at. Like one really successful sculpture was something that somebody had carved out of plaster, which I used to require, but it is such a massive pain in the tush box that I did not. I think that's insane to require that. But what they did is they combined elements of the stock, broccoli or cauliflower stock, elements of the sectional qualities of the outside of a banana. You know, where a banana isn't just a smooth form, it has these kind of sections going down the length of it, and combined sections of the interior of an orange, and they kind of put those forms together so that when you held it, it felt like it should be like a fleshy plant, a fleshy fruit that you would find on an alien planet somewhere, because they had incorporated some of these elements from several different plants together into the same form. And things like that are really very successful. Somebody else did a portrait of their wiener dog at home, and it wasn't as successful. What is the reason why we're stressing biomorphic abstraction so much is our brains are so encoded. If we're going to do something that promotes itself as a one-to-one correspondence with something in the observable world, if we're a little bit off, it really screws up everything. And sometimes if we're not really accomplished in carving or shaping something three-dimensionally, we'll make that, it will make it a little bit off, and we don't know how to fix it because we don't have the expertise to do that. We don't have the experience. And I don't want you guys dealing with that frustration. All of you did the high school drawing stuff where you're doing a hand or a face, something is a little bit off, you can't quite figure out what it is. That's the kind of thing we want to avoid. So if you do want to do any self-portraiture for this kind of thing, look at things like your nail bed, the webbing in between fingers, the base of your thumb, how the inside of your wrist looks, the inside of your arm, your jawline, edge of your nostril, your earlobe. Use those kinds of elements and put them together in a way where the forms kind of, your eye has fun going from one form to another. You know, we don't want to do something where you're doing a portrait of a mermaid, for example. We don't want that. Now you could do something where the sculpture expresses to you something like what the sound of splashing water, and you're using organic forms to kind of generate that sound. That'd be just fine. But we don't want to do anything that is related one-to-one with something in the real world. Does that make sense to everybody? I know that can be difficult to do, but the other thing to think about is as you're carving this, as you're working on it, think about what you would want. If you only had the senses of your hand and you could only feel something, what are the forms that you'd want to feel? If you only had one sense, what are those kinds of forms that you would want to feel adjacent to each other, blending into each other? So I want you to think about those kinds of things as opposed to a reproduction of, the 1991 edition Van shoe. So don't do that. All right, is this making sense to people? Kind of, sort of, ish. Anybody have any questions about it? Rihanna and Brittany, both you guys look like you bit into something that was supposed to be a pickle, but it didn't taste right. Do you guys have any questions?
Abstract is just really hard for me, so I'm trying to wrap my head around how I'm gonna do it with those parameters.
No, I just bit into a weird pickle.
Well, think about things like juxtaposition of shapes too. Like I mentioned earlobes. What would an ear look like if it was fused with a donut? That could be a really interesting form, where you have a torus shape with the kind of cartilage folds on the inside that you would like have in an ear. Or maybe if you have a friend that has gauges in their ear, maybe do a portrait of their earlobe. That might be interesting. But as you design it, instead of just leaving it the way it is, maybe twist part of it at right angles to the other part. So you have kind of a sideways looped figure eight. So, I want you to think about these kinds of things. And sometimes if you guys, do any of you guys have poster tack? Okay. Any of you have access to a Dollar Tree? Okay. I would say go to a Dollar Tree and get the Dollar. I'm so frustrated. The Dollar Tree up their prices to $1.25 for everything. And it frustrates me because the name of the store should be $1.25 Tree, but it just doesn't have the same ring to it. It doesn't have the same kind of lowbrow poetry to it. But so I'll just have to deal with my disappointment. But in the kids section with the toys and the crafts, they do have Play-Doh, generic Play-Doh, and I just go get $1.25 of that and start playing around. Do things where you maybe make a fist around some of the clay and then see what shape that comes up with. Maybe pinch things together like that and see what happens with that. Maybe make a donut and then maybe put some fins on the donut and twist it a little bit and see what that looks like. Or maybe sculpt something that, don't stick it in your ear, but maybe sculpt something like what would the if air was frozen inside of your ear, what would that look like? Maybe something like that would be interesting. Again, do not put the clay in your ear or in your nose, and don't eat it.
Well, there go my Friday plans.
I'd apologize, but I don't want you to do that. I've watched too many gross videos on YouTube about doctors trying to extract weird stuff from people's ears. Let's say no and move on. But think about things like that, or maybe step on it so the clay goes between your toes, and look at that. What kind of forms does that inspire? Or maybe step on and get the pattern at the bottom of your foot, and then roll that around, see what that does. Think about these kinds of ideas and shapes. What would a donut look like if it was sectioned like a banana? You know how a banana, it's not smooth all the way around. It seems to have like 5 or 6 sections that go the entire length. What if a donut was like that and kind of twisted a bit? So we're looking at a cruller style donut, but the crolling, it loops from the inside of the donut to the outside and back in again. What if it goes from end to end of the donut and there isn't an end, so it just goes, it loops around? Think about shapes like that. So if it gives you a hard time thinking about abstraction, just think about interesting shapes that you could come up with. If you don't want to go to a Dollar Tree, another thing that you could do is get a whole bunch of printer paper, tear it up into strips, then soak it in water, not in the sink. Don't ever do this in a sink. It's a horrible idea. Do it in a cup. And then after that's soaked, you can kind of squish some of the water out and use that almost like clay. And maybe play with that a little bit, see what kind of forms you can come up with that. When you're done, do not wash it down the sink, throw it away. It will clog the sink, and every one of your roommates and all your family members will hate you forever. Have you guys been in the Gunther building, the Gunther Trades building on the sculpture lab? In the sculpture area where you picked up the kits, when you walk outside of that, to the right is where the restrooms are and the printer, and to the left is a hallway. If you go down that hallway and you pass the emergency chem shower that's there, then you'll see the sculpture rooms. There's 2 of them right there, and I totally forgot what I was gonna say. No, if Jason is teaching this class, he's going to be doing like cast paper, and you can see in that first sculpture lab that has all the hundreds of shelves in it, you can see these big trays where they have it looks like gray vomit in them, and that's actually pulped paper, and people will take that, pull it out and squish it and do different things like that, and that gives some really interesting shapes as well. But I would recommend not playing with that unless you're in one of Jason's classes that does paper pulp casting. And that's kind of a bad idea to play with anyway, because if you have any hair on the back of your hands, the paper pulp gets in it, and then when it dries, you try to take it off, and it tears all the hair out of the back of your hands, which can be startling. But I just remember what I was going to say. In those rooms, do you guys want to guess how long it takes to fix the sinks? If some ding dong washes paper pulp or paper mache or any sort of goo down those sinks, do you want to guess how long it takes for on-campus facilities to come and fix it? The average is 2 years. Yeah. Jason has had to unclog those sinks several times himself. And so don't let if you see anybody messing around with those sinks, um, don't wash any glue down, don't wash any paper mache, nothing like that. Don't do that in any of the art sinks because like we are low man on the totem pole when it comes to, emergency clog removal. So just say no and move on. Anyway,
I was gonna guess like 3 months.
well, it may be longer, it may be less time now, but when I first started there about 5 years ago, um, yeah, one of them, it took them 2 years. They told us they'd be 2 years out. And so somebody just volunteered and fixed it themselves. Luckily, they knew how to do plumbing, but we're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to let them take care of it. So if it gets clogged, whoever clogged it is in big doo-doo. So don't let anybody, don't wash glue down the sink. Don't wash paper pulp down the sink. No plaster down the sink. People have actually done that. How stupid is that? It's bad idea. Anyway. All right. Any questions about the stuff we've talked about tonight? I want to mention that before the end of March, if you guys are interested, you do get extra credit if you do the critique for your own work or critique for somebody else on somebody else's work. And those assignment, it's like a 3-minute video where you go through the 4 steps, tools of artistic critique, 1 step at a time, and describe somebody else's work. So you don't need to be in the film yourself, just your voice. You do a screen share with a shot of the image and just record you talking about the image with those 4 tools of artistic critique. Do you guys remember what those 4 tools are? What's the first one?
It's describe.
Describe. Excellent. What's the second one? Anybody who's not Brittany?
I know one of them is interpret, but I forgot the order.
Yeah, interpret is number 3. So good. What's number 2? Anybody want Aaron or Long? Do you remember what number 2 is? It starts with an A.
Analysis.
Yes, excellent. Great. Aaron, do you remember what number 4 is? The last one?
I don't. I want to say evaluate, but I feel like that's
Yep,
wrong.
that's it.
Oh.
You're right. It's evaluate. Yeah, it's describe, analyze, interpret, evaluate. When you describe, you're talking about the physical parameters of the object you're looking at. When you analyze, you describe, you start talking about what is the process that the artist used to get there. What are the techniques that they use? What are the applications of texture that they used or the processes? The interpret is you started guessing about what's the world view of the artist? What are they trying to say? You may go into symbolism of the colors used, textures used. And we can go into symbolism of textures quite easily. What are smooth and flowing textures usually symbolic of?
Kind of like a calm or flowing type of energy. I don't know.
Yeah, perfect. And what are like sharp and prickly textures going to be symbols of or symbolic of?
Maybe danger.
Yeah, danger, anger, any sort of sharp, jaggedy type emotion. Yeah, excellent. So we can tell things like that. Colors as well. When somebody puts colors into something, that's another thing that I like about those 2 people talking about Henry Moore's reclining figure. It's an ivory. It's like a bone ivory color to it, and so it naturally fits the conversations about bone textures and kind of fitting into concepts about maybe some weird alien insect, different things like that. And you saw that the texture, the surface of the plaster itself, we can extrapolate different ideas about meaning from that. And then the fourth one, evaluate. is really simple. Is it successful? Or do you like it? Do you respond to it? How you feel about any of these things is so much less important to me than your ability to articulate how and why you feel that way. It's much more, one of the things that Dr. Long talks about is she describes the idea that when you look at something and you start talking about it, when you talk about it, uh, you're able to think about it more clearly. When you give words to your thoughts, you're able to think more precisely. Uh, when you're able to talk about something with articulation, then you can also justify and validate your perspective on it. Whether or not I like what you have to say, the fact that you can say it with confidence and you can say it with precision really demonstrates that you're thinking. You're using your critical thinking skills. And that's so much more important. Do you guys remember the Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, where he used to dress up as a teenage girl and they would do the ooh kind of thing? Yeah, that's the vocabulary we do not want to have in here. Unless, of course, we're talking about really gross earwax extractions on YouTube, then we can use ooh. But for anything else, use your big girl words. Use your grown-up college level words, because it sounds so much better. And when you are talking about your own artwork or somebody else's, like if I'm looking at something that Brittany's done and she asks for my opinion, I can say, oh, that's pretty. Or I can say, I really like what you've done with the establishment of this particular texture. And there's almost this rhythmic quality to the forms that you've used because you're repeating very similar shapes over and over again. Which sounds better to say? And what do you think that she will appreciate better as an artist when I use the words? If somebody just tells you, oh, it's pretty, that doesn't give you anything. But if I tell you why I like different elements of it and why some things make me uncomfortable, then that really helps you to understand whether or not you're getting your message across, or if this is an opportunity for a further conversation addressing ideas that you didn't even know you were working with as you were doing your sculpture. So something to think about. All right, well, that's all I've got today. Next week we will continue on, but I want to remind people that the due dates are there to help you to keep going. They are not rigid at all. And if you do notice as we go forward, there are further things where the dates overlap, let me know the dates are overlapping so I can go back and restructure. All right. I have noticed as well that on the annotated bibliographies, there's been several times where I've docked people points and I've said why, and within a couple of days they come back and have re-edited it, and so I could give them more points. If you've done that, and I've graded everything that I've seen in Canvas except for the structures with skin. Everything else is graded. If you resubmitted something, one of the problems that I'm seeing is that occasionally you'll go through the motions on Canvas, but for whatever reason, it won't overwrite the previous submission. So I don't see that anything has been resubmitted. And so if it's really important, if you've resubmitted something and I haven't regraded it, email me and let me know, because that has happened several times where somebody has updated the format on their annotations, where they originally they sent in URLs, and even though from their end they resubmitted with the correct MLA format citations, it didn't show up on my end as a resubmission. So I couldn't do anything. And so they would just, and sometimes it's just because the internet is wonky. And I'm sure it has everything to do with the infiltration of our government of shape-shifting lizard people. But yeah, that's plausible, right? I'm not a conspiracy theorist because most of the conspiracies are actual fact. No, that's not true. Please realize that that is just a joke. I don't want to be reported to anybody. But just be mindful of that. And anytime you don't get all the points you want, how many times can you resubmit? Anybody?
As many times as you want.
Yes. Yeah.
Infinitely.
Yes. Hopefully you won't have to, but I have noticed several people have gone over their quizzes, and some people have resubmitted quizzes twice. So, 3 submissions and a couple other times. But have I regraded it so you got a better score? All right, great. That's everybody can get 100%. I don't mind. It doesn't hurt my feelings at all. So if you get a 0 because I can't read it, just resubmit with the correct file type, or sometimes people have just submitted the wrong assignments. It's an easy fix. All right. Any last questions before we tie up?
I just remembered a comment I was gonna make earlier.
All right, go for it.
It was oh shoot, what was it? It was about critique. The pointing out specific details. Artists who aren't used to receiving like really specific comments on their art might be a bit flabbergasted, but usually in a good way if you roll up to something like, hey, the line weight in this is very intriguing to me, and I really like how you did the lighting on the left side, and they're like, wow, everyone else just says it looks great. That's crazy.
I really love that. It shows, man, I look like a little head on a bowling ball, don't I? I'm sitting in a chair and I'm leaning back, so so that looks weird. Okay. No, but I like that, because one of the most important aspects of art construction is the facility for communication. And if you are able to give precise language to your observations, I think that really helps to promote that kind of camaraderie we have as brain affected artists anyway. All of us, we're our own worst critiques. We're constantly self-effacing. We have this weird headspace, all of us artists do. And when you see something and you like it, and you tell somebody with precision the elements that you like, it feels really good. And when you step away from your own work and critique your own work as if it's the first time you've ever seen it and it's maybe done by a stranger, when you record that, I've had so many people in this class cry because they were forced to confront the fact that they actually were doing good work. When they stepped away and looked at it like a stranger would, they realized, wow, I really did do a good job. And I love that. I want to leave you with one thought. And I mentioned this before, I mentioned it about a month ago, but there's lots of different ways of looking at the universe. We can look at cause and effect. I mean, that definitely we can look at that. From one perspective, and I want you to think about this for a second, the universe is about 17 billion years old. And if we look at it from the perspective of cause and effect, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. For every activity, there is a cause. You've all heard that. That's something that we accept as a matter of fact. So if we extrapolate that out to where we are right now, each and every one of you is the inescapable result of 17 billion years of cause and effect in the universe. So when we talk about, when I say every voice is vital, everybody's voice should be heard. From one perspective, we can look at that the universe spent 17 billion years getting each of us ready to be exactly who we are right now. So do you think the universe wants to hear what you have to say as an artist? And I think that's true for each one of us, but it's also true for all of us. And I think that's worth thinking about. There's a guy named Ibn Arabi who lived and died about 12th century or so. He was a Muslim philosopher. And one of the things he said in his book, Bezels of Wisdom, which you can find on Amazon for either free or 99 cents. But one of the things he said was, if the universe extends out in an infinite amount of length of distance from each of us, then each of us functionally is the center of the universe. That 17 billion years was for our benefit. We are the center of the universe. But when we look around, every other person is also just as equally the center of the universe as we are. And that's if the universe is an infinitely large structure, then that is functionally true. All of us are the center of the universe, and each of us is. So that's something I think that's actually worth thinking about as you go on. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me tonight. I hope you guys have a wonderful week and weekend, and I look forward to seeing how your minds have blown for the next week. So we'll see you guys.